Have you been struggling to get your head around the preposition de, de, de? You're in good company. I get these questions from students every single day, probably, that I teach, and it comes from beginners, intermediates, and advanced learners alike. One day you think, yes, I know what the preposition de means and when to use it, and the next you find another way it's used, and it might mean something slightly different. There are lots of nuances and lots of different uses. I believe my superpower is to explain things really clearly and simply so that students get it and don't feel overwhelmed. So what I've done is I've divided it into 3 different levels so that whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, you can focus on a specific number of uses of this preposition. So for all your step-by-step French learning tips and tricks, please subscribe to this channel and you can hit the bell below. You'll be notified every time I share a new video. You can pause this video and do that now. And I'll get started with our preposition de. Il y a 3 choses à retenir. There are 3 things for you to remember. To start with, firstly, c'est pareil. De et des apostrophes. De and the apostrophe are the same thing. We just see them as the same word, and to help with pronunciation, when de is followed by a vowel or a word that starts with a vowel or the letter H, we'll turn it into an apostrophe so that we can link the words more easily. So treat them as the same thing, and as I share examples today, treat them as the same thing. Numéro 2, secondly, sometimes it's not going to look like a de on paper. So you need to understand which things fall under de. So if you see the word du, du, it is always a de and a le, the masculine definite article for masculine nouns, smushed together. De and le become du, du, du. You will also see des, des, which is a combination of de and les before a plural noun. So du before masculine singular, des before a plural. And then the 2 that you will notice probably without any problems is de space L apostrophe. That is when you have a singular noun that is either masculine or feminine, but the quirk is that it starts with a vowel or a H. Then you'll have de L apostrophe. And then if it's a feminine noun, singular, you'll see de la. Those last 2 are a lot easier to recognize. Numéro 3, the third thing to remember is that the meaning of de is varied, but mostly it can be translated as of, from, and in negative sentences, any. Of, from, any. If you can link those 3 meanings to de, you're going to be able to know when to use it a lot more. Alors, let's get started. You're going to find a number in each corner of this to tell you what level it's at. And my recommendation is to be a great curator of your own brain and work on the level you're on. You don't need to know today the uses of all the times where you might need la préposition de. Just focus on the one you're on and you need it. You could watch it all through once and then go back and watch the video that actually matches your level. My recommendation is as soon as you watch through and you find 2 things in a row that you didn't know, stop there. Stop there, take it away, start practicing in written sentences as well as in any opportunities you have to speak, and then come back and add more. See it as a layered process, like un millefeuille, that French dessert that has all of those thin layers, and you'll see that soon enough you'll be able to have the whole thing. So level 1, we're going to look at préposition de with quantities, and that's when it matches the meaning of. Un peu de, assez de, plein de, trop de, beaucoup de. A little bit of, enough of, plenty of, too much of, and a lot of, beaucoup de, which is probably one of the most popular ones. As I've said, de and the apostrophe are exactly the same. It's just going to depend on whether you put un peu de champagne, a little bit of champagne, trop de pluie, too much rain, or things like argent, money, or espoir, hope, which start with a vowel. And in that case, you could say enough money, assez d'argent, or a lot of hope, beaucoup d'espoir. It's only there to help us pronounce it more smoothly. Main use. The second part of this first level, this entry of preposition de, is when we're trying to explain the main use of something. We will say une bouteille d'eau minérale, a water bottle, a bottle of water even. Une flûte de champagne, a champagne glass full. Une carafe de rosé, rosé wine, carafe, jug. Et une tasse de café, a cup of coffee. So when you use de, again, it can be de or the apostrophe, and here it's going to be a bit of a of in every one of them. So a cup of coffee, and you can see that it matches the English, a cup of coffee. You get all four elements for main use of something. When we want to express the origin of something, this time meaning from, we're also going to use the preposition de. Cette huile d'olive vient de Provence. This olive oil comes from Provence. La danseuse venait d'Espagne. This dancer, female dancer, used to come from Spain. D'où venez-vous is a very useful question to ask if you're doing some conversation practice with other French learners. You might be joining on Zoom or meeting online because, let's be honest, travel is still a bit tricky at the time I'm recording this video. So you might say, where do you come from? Where are you from? Where are you logging in from? So d'où venez-vous? From where come you? Is the order of those words. Where do you come from? Je viens de France is how you scaffold an answer. I come from, and then the place. Je viens de, you can put the country or the city there because it means from, and therefore it's consistent. Just remember to put the apostrophe if you need to, if there's a vowel or a H in first position. Another use of de, which is easy enough to add here in level 1, is nobility. A lot of our historical names for nobility have the little particule de, and you'll spot it in names like Monsieur d'Agincourt, Madame de la Ponte, Mademoiselle du Jardin, and Mesdames des Marais. Des marais, it's all squished into one word, but it really comes from de, les, put together, and then marais. Superb. The mistakes I see at this level. I've already taught you quantity, main use, origin, and nobility. Little side one for that one. But the mistakes I tend to see is that when we want to use beaucoup, and there's a plural noun afterwards, the temptation is to put beaucoup de. Try to know when you do that, you're probably not immune to it. It's always de. Beaucoup de table. Even if you mean a lot of tables and it's a plural, it has to be a lot of. De stays the same, even if it's something plural. Trop de villes, too many cities. Again, it's a plural. The temptation might be to put des, but you have to remember it's just two many of. We have to have an of there, and of is de. Another mistake I see is not combining the de with the next word. It could be a le, it could be a les, when you're using it in the meaning of from. So, ils reviennent du marché. They come back from the market. They're chunky words, and sometimes there's a bit of resistance to smush them back into a du, even though we know it's de, le, and it always becomes du. She comes back from Mexico. This one, elle rentre du Mexique, will be even easier to miss. You might just put de Mexique, from Mexico. But remember that for countries, we always have either le, la, or les before our countries. So Mexique is one of the few that is a masculine country. So this one will give us de, le next to each other, which needs to be smushed into du. This is level 2. So if you've already learned a few new things in level 1, stick with that one. Level 2, we're going to talk about the ownership of things. When we talk about ownership, in English, we have a few structures of sentences. We might say the love of his life, or we might put an apostrophe S, like my cousin's dog or my neighbor's son. That's how we mark ownership in English. Now, when we have the structure of the love of his life, that structure is more helpful because that's how we do it in French. So we'll get l'amour de, of, sa vie. That's the structure we use. So when you try and express ownership in English with an apostrophe S, you need to take the time to do one extra step. So when you start with the thought, my cousin's dog, you need to flatten it out to say the dog of my cousin, and then go to French with that. Le chien de ma cousine. Same with the neighbor's son. You need to flatten that structure to say the son of the neighbors. And then remember that of the might need an extra little step. Here we have neighbors, plural, so we're going to have les, and de, les will become des. So we'll end up with le fils des voisins. L'amour de sa vie, le chien de ma cousine, le fils des voisins. So a little trickier. I'd like you to try doing this with the village's windmill. The village's windmill. How would you say that in French? The steps are that we are going to flatten that phrase and make it the something of something. The windmill of the village is what you're going to have, which then will give you, with the masculine le village, we're going to end up with that de le combo here, which will give us le moulin du village. I hope you were able to work that one out. Or learn the word moulin. Level 2 is also going to encompass lots of avoir expressions that use the preposition de. Avoir envie de, to feel like. Avoir peur de, to be scared of. Avoir besoin de, to need. Avoir la chance de, to be lucky to. Avoir l'intention de, to intend on. Avoir l'habitude de, to be used to. A lot of these can take a verb afterwards. Par exemple, j'ai envie de voyager. But I could also feel like coffee. J'ai envie d'un café. So make sure that there's a de there. J'ai envie de. And then if you are putting a verb, it can just stay in plain old infinitive with that er ending for voyager. Not all of them. It'll have ir or re endings if they're regular verbs. Avoir peur de can have a knock-on effect, because if you have a noun afterwards, to be scared of, you could be scared of traveling. You could say, il a peur de voyager. But if you're putting a noun after, he is scared of something, here, spiders, Il a peur des. We're going to have to smush that de and this les because we've used a noun. So be extra careful when you have a noun after these preposition de. Superb. We have an expression to say to be in the middle or in the midst of doing something. The emphasis is on right now, and we're using the verb être, which will conjugate, and then you have to keep the words en train de, even if you're doing an action that's not in a train, it just means in the middle of, and then the action you're actually doing. The thing you're actually in the middle of is going to be just an infinitive verb afterwards. So you could say, I'm studying, j'étudie. Or you could say, I'm in the middle of studying, je suis en train d'étudier. You could say, she's sleeping, elle dort, just with a simple present. Or you could say, she's in the middle of sleeping, elle est en train de dormir. She's in the middle of sleeping, or she's sleeping right now, right this minute. If you want to add that emphasis, this is a really nice one to learn. Être en train de, and then you just put an infinitive verb. All you need to do is conjugate être, which I'm sure you know by now. Now, this one is one I see that trips learners up and sneaks into their written French quite often. It's that when we have a sentence in the affirmative form that contains un, une, or some, du, de la, de, l'apostrophe, des, when it turns into a negative sentence, we need to remove un, une, des, du, all of those words, and just replace it with a plain old de, because it's going to mean any. For example, I have a twin sister. J'ai une sœur jumelle. We're not going to say in French, and to be correct, I don't have a twin sister. We're going to say I don't have any twin sister. And that's this any that you're going to find when you're using phrases like ne pas or ne jamais, ne rien. You need to remember that if you're saying a sentence in negative, use de to replace any un, une, or words that's standing for the word some. So, j'ai une sœur jumelle will give you je n'ai pas de sœur jumelle. I have a gray dog. J'ai un chien gris. Je n'ai pas de chien gris. And if you want to learn how to talk to your chien gris, I just shared a video last week, and I'll make sure to link it in this video too. I'm going to make a note now so I don't forget. Il voit des enfants. He sees children or some children. And then the negative, he doesn't see any children. We have to have that de in there for any. And here we'll have a D apostrophe because of enfant starting with a vowel. Il voit des enfants. Il ne voit pas d'enfants. Really take the time to make a few examples for the negative one. It's the one that I see as a very, very popular mistake. And that takes us to level 3. So if you've learned a few new things in level 2, it's time to pause and maybe practice those ones so you don't leave this video overwhelmed. Ready? Niveau 3. Niveau 3, we're going to introduce le passé récent. Le passé récent allows us to express things like I've just. We're going to conjugate the verb venir. We're going to put the preposition de, and then we're going to put an infinitive verb. It's a fairly easy verb construction to make, but you don't need it. It's such a narrow use that you don't need it too early on. I'd rather you spend the time to master the other uses of the preposition de and add this one in time. But it's a really fun one to add. So you might want to say, nous venons de manger. We've just eaten. We've just done something. With the verb manger, nous venons de manger. We've just eaten. You're conjugating venir for nous in present, venons, then you put in de, and then your infinitive. Elle vient d'acheter un souvenir. She's just bought a souvenir. Elle vient d'acheter un souvenir. La préposition de. Now this one, it's just really one of these rules that the French have added and that doesn't really add much value, but it's there and we just have to deal with it. As a teacher, I have to take the time to explain it. As a learner, you need to take the time to learn it. But really, it adds a lot of complication for not much. So, you know how adjectives go after the noun in French? I'll say to describe wine, I might say it's expensive or it's red. Those are my adjectives, they come after. Le vin rouge, le vin cher, etc. If you want to use some of the more common adjectives, they're usually short and they're usually quite common. We've got a few that break that rule and they actually come and place themselves before the noun. Things like beau, belle, petit, jeune, and vieux. In my first example here, we're saying that the flowers are red. Nothing to report. We're going to use the normal little preposition here. They are red flowers. Remember that when there's no word in English between they are and the red flowers, what's implied is some. And here, some followed by something plural is always going to be des. D'accord? I'll have to make another video on the use of some, perhaps, but this would be the standard sentence. And in English, you just wouldn't have that word des. You just say, they are red flowers. In French, we'll have to say, il y a des, some, flowers red. The adjective goes after. But when we use one of these adjectives that go before the noun, the des becomes de. Only for these adjectives that break the rule and come before the noun. So if you want to say beautiful flowers, they are beautiful flowers, you will now have il y a de belles fleurs. And I have to apologize for that rule. It's really inconsiderate. Again, this is something, probably a rarer occasion, but this is some uses of de that you might see when we're trying to express out of. De nous quatre, tu es la plus bavarde. Out of the four of us, you are the chattiest, the most talkative, la plus bavarde. De nous quatre. Out of the four of us. De ces vins, je préfère celui-ci. Out of these wines, I prefer this one. D'accord? So I might be pointing at it or holding it. Celui-ci, de ces vins. Out of these wines. D'accord? Out of the four of us, out of these wines. When you're trying to express out of, just know that you're back to using preposition de. And finally, our double verb construct. Definitely a more advanced rule, but when you want to use two verbs together in one sentence, you're already being a bit fancy. And sometimes you're going to need, the first verb is going to need a de before the next infinitive verb. Par exemple, tu essayes de partir d'ici. Are you trying to leave from here? Or je finis de cuire ce steak. I'm finishing cooking, or I finish cooking this steak. So you can see that sometimes in English, you'll have a little preposition. I'm trying to leave. Sometimes I finish cooking. There's no de at all. There's no need for a preposition in English. But what it is that the verb essayer, to try, and the verb finir, before another verb comes and adds itself straight after in infinitive form, is going to need a de. So you'll always have essayer de, conjugate essayer, then your de, then your infinitive, conjugate your finir, then leave your de, and then your infinitive. There are quite a few verbs that work like that. With a verb conjugé, conjugate that one in any tense you want, then a de, then a verb infinitif. Here's a little list that could be useful. Finir de, essayer de, so to finish doing something, to try to do something. Choisir de, to choose to do something. Demander de, to ask to do something. Oublier de, to forget to do something. Permettre de, to allow to do something. Refuser de, to refuse to do something. Parler de, with a verb, you could have to talk about doing something. And rêver de, to dream of doing something. Some of them you won't even notice there's a little preposition needed. You need to recognize them in French, that those are verbs that go with de before you put another infinitive verb. Et voilà, that is our double verb construct, and really it covers the main uses of the preposition de. If la préposition de is still giving you a headache, it's still making you sweat, feel free to reach out. We at French Speak are a team of passionate teachers who do this every day. We love to answer all your questions and practice these with you. It's one thing watching a video and taking a few notes, but it's a completely other level of mastery when you get a chance to practice with a teacher, get all your questions answered, do some more examples together and really get a robust understanding of it. There are some parts of language that really deserve your attention. Otherwise, they just keep niggling at you throughout the whole journey. So I hope this was helpful. I know many students have asked me to do a thorough explanation of la préposition de. So this is it for you today. As always, if you liked this video, please tell me in the comments below, subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and share it with another language learner like you. Au revoir.